he is trying to prepare the Russian public for a much longer war. So initially it was a special military operation. We're going to take on the Nazis in Ukraine. It was going to be a short, sharp, victory for Russia. It's obviously been a disaster. And so what he's doing is saying, we need to dig deep. We may do another mobilization, and this is going to be a long war to defend the fatherland. They're framing it as a Russia NATO war rather than a Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Ukraine has claimed this morning that its forces have killed 100 Russian soldiers in a single strike in the salt mining city of Soledar. Yesterday, the Wagner group of Russian mercenaries claimed it had taken control of the city. Ukraine denies that. The group has also claimed to have found the body of one of two missing British aid workers in Soledar, Andrew Bagshaw and Christopher Parry. Let's try to make sense of this stage of the war and speak to Dr. Mike Martin, who's War Studies Senior Visiting Fellow at King's College London. Morning.
Morning.
Now, we have had, of course, as you might expect, conflicting reports from Ukraine and Russia about who's in control in Soledar. What information do you have about what's going on there?
Yeah, it is super difficult to tell. And an added complication is, obviously, normally in war, you've got the two sides, Ukraine and Russia, claiming different things, but also within Russia, there's a bit of a power struggle going on. So you've got the Wagnerites, which is this private military company, a mercenary group, basically full of convicts that are sprung out of Russian prison to fight in Ukraine. And then you've got the Russian military, and they tell slightly different stories as well. The bottom line is Russia has made some gains in Soledar, which is a small town which has got a salt mine in it, which is great for storing equipment and personnel underground. And it's come at great cost. They've had very, very heavy casualties. They don't have the whole town, and Ukraine is still got a corridor to it and holds the western outskirts of the town. That's kind of the central position.
How are troop movements tracked and verified? Who does that, and how reliable is it?
So obviously the Americans and the Brits and the French keep track of all that stuff. It's not, and they only obviously publish some figures rather than all of them. It's not that accurate. I'll give you an example. I mean, casualty figures are a great example. So the US is saying that the Wagnerites, this mercenary group, have lost 15,000 in Soledar and Bakhmut in the last few months, 5,000 killed and 10,000 wounded. But it's very difficult to say with those 10,000 wounded, when they disappear into the medical chain, what percentage of those dies. It's probably quite a high percentage of them die. So it's really quite difficult to keep a track of all this stuff.
And what do you make of what Vladimir Putin has had to say? The situation is very difficult. There's a picture on the front page of the Times of the general who has been demoted. This is General Sergei Surovikin. What does all of that mean, if anything?
I think they're two separate things. So Putin, in saying it's difficult, most communications with the Russian leadership are directed at the Russian population. And so what's happening here, and this isn't an isolated comment from Putin, it's part of a bigger train of comments over the last couple of months. He is trying to prepare the Russian public for a much longer war. So initially it was a special military operation. We're going to take on the Nazis in Ukraine. It was going to be a short, sharp, victory for Russia. It's obviously been a disaster. And so what he's doing is saying, we need to dig deep. We may do another mobilization, and this is going to be a long war to defend the fatherland. They're framing it as a Russia NATO war rather than a Russian invasion of Ukraine. And then with this demotion of Surovikin and promotion of Gerasimov, but as well as a power struggle between the Russian military and the Wagnerite, the mercenary group, there's also a power struggle within the Russian military as well. And Surovikin was only brought in 3 months ago. And then he's actually quite competent when, compared to some of his peers in the senior Russian military. But he speaks truth to power. So he's probably been telling Putin some bad news that he doesn't want to hear.
Right.
And Gerasimov is, sweet talks Putin. And so probably one's been moved out and the other's been moved in. it doesn't. They've changed their command structure multiple times
Mm.
since the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine.
Well, where do you think we currently are then, finally? Because I think the last time we spoke to you, you said that you
Mm,
thought that the war would be over by the summer. Obviously, there's going to be
mm,
different help
mm.
in terms of Patriot missiles, etc. Do you how much
Sure.
do you still think that timeline is possible?
Yeah, I'm still broadly optimistic for Ukraine. I mean, there's two modes, if you like, in this war. One is where Russia makes small gains over fairly insignificant territory at great loss. We're in that mode at the moment. And then once they've exhausted themselves, hitting themselves against the Ukrainian forces who just retreat slowly and inflict great casualties on them, the Ukrainians then swing into action and take a large chunk of territory. And we've seen that three times around Kyiv, around Kharkiv, and then around Kherson just before Christmas. And so what I expect to happen over the next 2 months or so is that this particular grinding phase will culminate, and then Ukraine will go on the offensive. As you cited Patriots, they're also getting a load of tanks and infantry fighting vehicles from the West. And I expect we'll see some more progress from Ukraine.
Okay, Mike, thank you. That's Dr. Mike Martin. He is War
Thank you.
Studies Senior Visiting Fellow at King's College London.
7:53.